The waitress played past the section where she'd always tensed during lessons. The accident's timeline reset in her mind. Not the end of something, but a turn she hadn't seen coming. The notes kept flowing despite the scars, maybe even because of them. When she finally lifted her hands, the restaurant stayed quiet a moment longer. The piano's strings hummed faintly beneath the lid. Her left wrist throbbed, but differently now, not with useless pain, but the good ache of use. The $100 still pressed against her thigh through the apron fabric. It suddenly seemed like the least important thing at the table. She lowered the fallboard gently. The candelabra's reflection wavered in its polished surface. As she stood, the millionaire began clapping, not the polite smatter of someone impressed. By a parlor trick, but slow, deliberate strikes of palm against palm, the sound snapped the room back into motion. Silverware clinked. Someone whispered urgently to their companion. The waitress didn't stay to hear any of it. She walked toward the kitchen, where the dishwasher's clatter and the grill's hiss waited. Her fingers tingled. The joint she'd once cursed now felt curiously light, as if the music had loosened something inside. Through the service doors, the kitchen's heat hit her face. The head chef raised an eyebrow at her flushed expression. "Table 12's risotto is dying back here," he said, but smirked when he said it. She tied her apron tighter and reached for the tray. Echoes of the nocturne still moved through her. Not the notes themselves, but the space they'd cleared. In her pocket, alongside pens and order slips, the business card's sharp corners pressed against her thigh through the fabric. A fork slipped from a woman's fingers and clattered against her plate. The sound echoed sharply in the room, but no one reached to retrieve it. The tines kept vibrating against the china, mirroring the piano's fading notes. Behind the bar, the bartender's cocktail shaker stilled mid-motion. Ice cubes settled into silence. He didn't notice the condensation dripping onto his sleeve. His gaze fixed on the waitress's left hand, how it navigated the keys despite its stiffened pinky. At a corner booth, a child's spoon hovered halfway to his mouth. Chocolate sauce dripped onto the tablecloth in slow, uneven dots. His mother didn't scold him. She was too busy watching the way the waitress's shoulders moved, not with the rigid control of a concert pianist, but with the looser rhythm of someone playing for no one but herself. The millionaire's phone buzzed against the tablecloth. The screen lit up with a notification. He flipped it face down without looking. His thumb tapped once against the stem of his wine glass, then stilled. The waitress played Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor, the same piece she'd practiced for her audition years ago. But her fingers shaped it differently now. The runs weren't as clean. The left hand simplified chords where the old injury wouldn't stretch. Yet the music didn't suffer for it. If anything, the imperfections made it truer. At a back table, a woman pressed a folded napkin to the corner of one eye. She hadn't cried at her father's funeral last month. The rigidity of the service, the stiff formality of the hymns, they'd left her dry-eyed and hollow. But this untidy, aching performance undid something in her. The restaurant manager appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. He'd come to scold the unauthorized performance. But as the melody swelled, his pen slipped from his fingers. The clipboard, tilted, forgotten against his thigh. A busboy balancing 3 empty plates froze mid-step. The tray tilted precariously in his hand, but he didn't adjust it. His dishwater-chapped fingers tightened instinctively, as if the music required his stillness. The piano itself seemed to wake from long disuse. Its soundboard, dormant for years, vibrated with every hammer strike. The worn huffs released decades of stored dust. Inside the casing, strings buzzed against aged felt, imperfections that gave the sound a rawness no glossy grand piano could replicate. Near the kitchen doors, a waiter stopped mid-sentence. His joke about the millionaire's arrogance died unspoken. He gripped the tray handle harder, suddenly ashamed. A man at the bar set down his whiskey. The ice had melted, diluting the amber liquid. He didn't notice. His fingers tapped an unconscious rhythm against the counter. Not the melody, but the spaces between the notes where the waitress's injured hand had to breathe. The hostess stood very still by her podium. Her usual poised smile faltered. She Remembered the waitress's first day, how she'd lingered near the piano during her break, touching the closed lid like it was someone else's property. In the kitchen, a line cook paused with his knife midair. A sliver of shallot clung to the blade. The usual kitchen clatter had died down to a hush. Even the exhaust fan seemed to turn more quietly. The millionaire's daughter, 10 years old and bored in her stiff party dress, stopped swinging her legs under the table. Her dessert spoon made a soft plink as she set it down. She'd hated piano lessons since she started them. The metronome's ticking made her skin itch. But this was different. This didn't sound like practice. An elderly man near the window closed his eyes. His wife reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. They didn't speak. The music said enough. The waitress didn't see any of this. Her gaze stayed fixed on the keys, but her focus turned inward. She played through the nocturne's difficult passage not with technical precision, but with something better, the weight of lived experience. Her left hand stumbled, recovered, adapted. At table 12, a woman touched her throat absently. She'd studied voice in college before parental expectations steered her toward law school. The waitress's playing resurrected an old, buried hunger. Her fork scraped unintentionally against her plate, a dissonant note that made several diners turn and glare. The bartender finally noticed his spilled cocktail. Instead of wiping it up, he set the shaker down entirely. His apron swayed as he leaned forward against the bar, elbows on the polished wood. The child in the corner booth let his spoon drop entirely. Chocolate pooled on the tablecloth, dark and spreading. His mother didn't scold him. Her fingers tightened around her wine glass instead. The millionaire uncrossed his legs. His polished shoe tapped once, twice, then stilled. He hadn't expected virtuosity. Certainly not this. Music that prioritized feeling over flawlessness. His daughter was watching the waitress with an expression he'd never seen during her lessons. A waiter ducked out of the kitchen with 2 steaming plates. He took 3 steps before the music registered. His arms tensed, slowing his pace to avoid disrupting the moment. The food would get cold. It didn't seem to matter. The piano's middle C stuck slightly when the waitress played it, a tiny mechanical protest. She didn't flinch or correct it. The note's slight imperfection became part of the music. At the chef's table, a spoon sank slowly into a half-eaten chocolate soufflé. The pastry chef, normally obsessive about plating, didn't notice the collapse. Her fingers curled into her palms, nails leaving half-moon indentations. The woman who'd dropped her fork finally retrieved it. But she didn't resume eating. The tines rested lightly against her thumb, moving slightly as if tracking the melodies. Rise and fall. The restaurant's front door opened. A couple entered, laughing about the rain outside. The hostess shot them a silencing look so fierce they actually froze in place. The man's umbrella dripped quietly onto the mat. The busboy finally remembered his tray. He adjusted its weight with a quiet clatter of plates, then stood rooted in place. His supervisor didn't reprimand him. The millionaire's phone buzzed again beneath his palm. He didn't flip it over. His thumb stroked once along the edge of his placemat, a silent timekeeper to the music's rhythm. When the waitress lifted her hands from the keys at last, the room didn't erupt in applause immediately. The silence stretched, thick with something more complicated than admiration. It was the quiet of people recalibrating their assumptions. The piano strings continued humming faintly under the closed lid. The waitress flexed her left hand, fingers stretching against the lingering stiffness. She didn't look at the crowd. Then the millionaire began clapping. Slow at first, then with gathering certainty. His daughter joined in, small hands striking together with surprising force. The bartender whistled through his teeth. By the time the waitress stood up, the applause had spread through the room like a wave. But the real story wasn't in the clapping. It was in the moments just before, when an entire restaurant forgot to breathe. The busboy finally moved his tray. The bartender picked up his shaker. The woman retrieved her fork properly this time. But nothing quite returned to how it was before the music started. As the waitress walked back toward the kitchen, The millionaire reached into his jacket pocket. This time it wasn't money he withdrew. His daughter watched him with wide eyes. As he stood and followed the waitress, some unspoken decision settling across his features. The piano's lid gleamed under the chandeliers, no longer just a piece of furniture. The child in the corner finally licked the chocolate off his spoon. His mother didn't chide him. Instead, she reached over and wiped his cheek with her thumb, her touch gentler than usual. The kitchen doors swung shut behind the waitress. The restaurant's noise level rose again. Silverware clinking, ice cubes settling, chairs scraping. But the conversation sounded different now. Lower, more intentional. The millionaire smirked as he slid a $100 bill across the table. "Play something," he said. The waitress hesitated. She hadn't touched a piano in years, but when her fingers finally met the keys, the entire restaurant froze. What happened next wasn't just music, it was a moment that changed everything. This is the story of how one unexpected performance shattered every assumption in the room. The restaurant hummed with conversation and clinking glasses. Near the window, a man in a tailored navy suit set down his wine glass. His eyes followed the waitress as she cleared a nearby table, stacking dishes onto her tray with practiced efficiency. He raised a hand. Just 2 fingers lifted, the barest movement, but it stopped her mid-reach. She approached his table, fingers leaving faint smudges on her black apron. On the mahogany surface between them, his index finger tapped a crisp $100 bill twice before sliding it forward. "Play something," he said. The words sounded casual, like he'd asked for more water, but his eyes watched her face too closely for it to be a simple request. The waitress glanced toward the corner. There sat the restaurant's baby grand piano, its dark wood decorated with a thin layer of dust. The lid was permanently closed, a candelabra placed on top as if to say, "Look, don't touch." She flexed her right hand unconsciously. The restaurant hostess, who'd been eyeing the exchange, raised one well-groomed eyebrow. At the bar, 2 businessmen paused their conversation to observe. The piano hadn't been tuned in years. Management bought it for ambiance, not music. Last week, a busboy got reprimanded for resting a tray on its closed lid. "Well?" The millionaire leaned back in his chair. His cufflinks caught the light as he crossed his arms. The bill remained perfectly centered on the table between them. The waitress wiped her palms against her apron. A coffee stain near the pocket resisted the motion. The restaurant grew quieter without anyone meaning to make it so. She walked toward the piano. Her rubber-soled shoes made no sound on the hardwood. The piano bench creaked when she sat, the old leather protesting after months without use. She lifted the fallboard. A faint smell of old ivory and lemon polish rose from the keys. The middle C had a small nick in its edge. Her left thumb found the mark instinctively, as if remembering. The air conditioning hummed. Somewhere in the kitchen, a chef called out, "An order." The waitress spread her fingers over the yellowed keys. They felt cooler than she expected. At table 7, a woman leaned toward her companion. "Did you know she could—" The whisper cut off as the first note sounded. It wasn't perfect. The piano's G above middle C wobbled slightly out of tune, but the next note landed clean, and the one after that found its mark. By the 4th measure, the waitress wasn't thinking about dust or raised eyebrows or even the $100 anymore. Her left hand remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The fingers found their placements, the weak 5th finger compensating where the old injury still ached. She played like someone rediscovering a lost language, halting at first, then with growing certainty. The bartender's shaker stilled mid-pour. At the chef's table, a spoon hung suspended over a half-eaten creme brulee. The millionaire's phone buzzed against the tablecloth. He didn't reach for it. The waitress closed her eyes. The music wasn't the piece she'd practiced for her Juilliard audition all those years ago. That would have been too polished, too expected. Instead, her fingers found a Chopin nocturne, one her teacher used to say should sound like morning and moonlight. A busboy froze in the doorway, tray balanced on one palm. The manager stopped adjusting his tie. In the kitchen, the line cook stopped shouting. The entire restaurant became an audience of held breaths. No one remembered to clap when she finished. The silence stretched a beat too long, thick with something, more than surprise. The millionaire stood, his chair scraping loud in the hushed room. His footsteps sounded heavy and deliberate as he approached the piano. Up close, the waitress could see where his razor had nicked his jaw that morning. He smelled like expensive cologne and the faintest hint of cigar smoke. Without a word, he placed his business card on the piano's music desk. "Call me," he said. Then he walked out, leaving his half-finished wine and the $100 bill behind. Outside, a taxi splashed through a puddle. Someone in the kitchen dropped a metal pan. The waitress stared at the card. It bore the logo of a recording label known for classical crossover artists. The hostess was the first to move. She began clapping slowly, then faster. A few diners joined, and the bartender whistled through his teeth. The waitress barely heard any of it. Under the piano lid, the strings still vibrated with the memory of music. Her left wrist throbbed where the bones had mended wrong. The card weighed nothing in her hand, yet it pulled at something deep in her chest. She closed the fallboard carefully. The candelabra wobbled slightly as she stood. Her apron pocket crinkled when she slid the card inside, right next to the pen she used for orders and the crumpled grocery list. The kitchen doors swung open as she pushed through them. The shouts and steam wrapped around her like a familiar coat. "Order up for table 12, someone called. A fry cook waved his tongs at her. Everything looked the same. Everything felt different. Her shaking hand steadied as she picked up another tray. Her fingers hovered above the keys, not quite touching. The ivory felt colder than she remembered. A thin film of dust came away when she pressed middle C. The note sounded dull, slightly flat. She inhaled the piano's scent, lemon polish and aging wood. It smelled like practice rooms used to, like the cramped studio where her teacher would tap her wrist with a pencil whenever her fingers tensed. "Play with your scars," he'd say, "not despite them." The memory surfaced so clearly she almost turned to look for him. 4 years ago, she'd been preparing for her Juilliard audition. The Chopin ballade she'd worked on for months finally flowed naturally under her hands. She'd bought a new dress for the occasion, navy blue with buttons that matched the piano keys. That morning, she'd warmed up scales while watching snow fall past the practice room window. The car hit her bike at the intersection near campus. No broken ribs, no head injury, just her left wrist snapping against the pavement at the wrong angle. The surgeon said he'd done his best, but the bones would never sit quite right again. "You might play for pleasure," he told her. But not at that level. He'd looked genuinely sorry when he said it. She took the waitress job 6 months later. The restaurant had a piano. When they interviewed her near the hostess stand, she kept staring at it. "You play?" the manager asked. She shook her head. "Just always liked how they look." Every shift, she wiped its surface with a rag, sneaking glances at the locked fallboard. Sometimes she'd catch a customer playing chopsticks during birthdays and feel her hands twitch in response. Nights when the dining room emptied, she'd run a fingertip along the bench's cracked leather, remembering. The millionaire's $100 bill weighed down her apron pocket now. She flexed her left hand. The knuckles stood out sharply where scar tissue pulled the skin taut. The first note she played wavered, barely audible. Her pinky finger ached immediately, the old protest starting up on schedule. Then her right hand found a G major chord. The piano's hammers stirred after years of disuse, the strings releasing decades of stored vibration. Muscle memory took over. Her left hand automatically curved into position, compensating where the damaged tendons refused to stretch. The crowd's murmurs changed tone, not laughter anymore, but something quieter. At his table, the millionaire's amused expression slipped. He set down his wine glass without drinking. She chose the nocturne she'd learned right before the accident, one her teacher claimed should sound like moonlight on moving water. The runs weren't clean. Her left hand simplified chords her fingers couldn't span anymore. But something unexpected happened as she played through the stiffness. The music became hers in a way polished perfection had never allowed. Behind closed eyes, she saw the practice room again. The metronome's steady tick, sheet music covered, in penciled fingerings. Only now she noticed how tightly she'd always gripped the keys, how fear had lived beneath even her best performances. This time, no one graded her. No future depended on each note. The piano revealed its age as she played, a sticky ebb in the bass, worn felt muffling the hammers in the upper register. She worked around the imperfections the way her hands now worked around the damage. The melody emerged anyway, changed but recognizable. A waitress carrying a tray of drinks froze mid-step. Near the kitchen, a line cook peered through the service window, wiping his hands on a towel. The millionaire uncrossed his arms. He'd expected maybe chopsticks, a halting rendition of some pop song. Not this broken, living thing filling the room. Her left wrist burned as she reached for an octave she could no longer properly stretch. Instead of forcing it, she rolled the chord, turning limitation into choice. The nocturne's melancholy suited the adjustment, as if Chopin had anticipated her injured hand. At the bar, a man stopped scrolling his phone. A woman rested her chin in her palm, eyes unfocused. The music didn't command silence through virtuosity. It simply made conversation seem unnecessary. At the piano, the candelabra's reflection wavered in the polished wood. Inside, its strings still vibrated faintly, long after the last note had faded. The millionaire's right foot tapped against the floor at first, his polished Oxford shoe keeping quarter time. Then the rhythm faltered. His heel lifted mid-tap and didn't come back down. He knew this piece. His daughter had played it last Thursday afternoon while he checked emails in his home office. The same Chopin nocturne, but where his daughter's version had been crisp and correct. This one pulsed with something his expensive sound system couldn't replicate. 3 months ago, he'd paid a small fortune for the German piano now occupying his living room. Hired a conservatory professor at $400 an hour. Brought in a technician twice a month to keep the action perfectly weighted. His daughter complained about practicing more than she actually played. The waitress's left hand navigated the keys differently than his daughter's ever did. Not with technical precision, but with the ragged edges of someone rediscovering a lost language. Her fingers hesitated before certain intervals, the damaged one barely stretching far enough. Yet the emotion landed truer than any flawless performance he'd heard at charity galas. A stain darkened the waitress's apron pocket where pens had leaked. The hem frayed slightly near her knee. She'd tucked her hair behind one ear, revealing a small silver hoop, the only thing about her that looked deliberately chosen. The $100 bill he'd offered now seemed like something you'd hand a trained seal at a circus. As the melody swelled, her posture changed. The rigid waitress carrying heavy trays all evening let her shoulders drop. A lock of hair escaped its tie. She didn't push it back. The music grew louder, not through force, but because she stopped holding anything back. His hand moved toward his inside pocket, where his wallet held at least 10 more bills like the one on the table, then stopped. Money had been the wrong currency here. What she was giving the room couldn't be bought or demanded. He saw that now. The realization lodged in his chest like a second heartbeat. His daughter always played with her teeth slightly, clenched, eyes darting to see if he approved. This woman, who probably took the bus home in those scuffed shoes, who served people like him for a living, played like someone remembering love. At his daughter's last recital, all the parents had complimented the piano's rich tone. No one mentioned the music itself. The memory sat sour in his throat now. He'd framed his daughter's first prize ribbon instead of asking why she'd started locking herself in her room after lessons. The waitress's pinky finger couldn't fully stretch for the octave. He watched her roll the chord instead, turning limitation into choice. His daughter would have forced it, risking a mistake, because he'd taught her that imperfection meant failure. A waiter passed his table balancing 3 entrees. The millionaire didn't notice the aromatic steam or hear the plate rattle slightly. His fingers tightened around his unused fork. The silverware at home was heavier, monogrammed. His daughter hated how it felt in her small hands. He looked at his phone lying face down on the tablecloth. 3 unread notifications from his assistant. Earlier they'd seemed urgent. Now he couldn't remember why. The waitress's music didn't command attention through technical brilliance. It simply made everything else seem trivial. His daughter's practice notebook flashed in his mind. The penciled reminders from her teacher, count aloud here, and relax, shoulders. No notes about joy or feeling or getting lost in the sound. Just corrections. Always corrections. The millionaire sipped his wine without tasting it. The vintage had mattered intensely 15 minutes ago. Now he couldn't recall if it was the 95 or 98 Bordeaux. The glass left a faint ring on the linen when he set it down. Something in the waitress's posture caught his throat, how she leaned slightly toward the piano, like it might embrace her. His daughter always sat ramrod straight at the keyboard, as if awaiting inspection. He'd thought it showed discipline. Near the piano, the restaurant's oldest busboy wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The millionaire recognized him, 60 if he was a day, always humming while clearing tables. That man heard more soul in these imperfect 8 minutes than the millionaire had in every polished performance he'd bankrolled. His phone buzzed against the tablecloth again. He ignored it. The waitress was playing through the pain now, not hiding it or compensating, but weaving it into the music. The nocturne sounded different than the recordings on his streaming service. Realer, the frayed, apron string swayed slightly as she pedaled. A loose thread caught the light. He imagined his daughter in that apron, how she'd complain about the cheap fabric, the stain. Then he imagined her playing with the waitress's abandon, and something tight in his ribs loosened. For the first time, he noticed the piano itself. The restaurant's baby grand wasn't a showpiece like his at home. Nicks marred the music desk. The fallboard's veneer had worn thin in spots. Yet under the waitress's hands, it sounded more alive than his 6-figure instrument ever had. His daughter didn't love playing. He knew that suddenly, with perfect clarity. She loved pleasing him. The difference sat like lead in his stomach. All those master classes, all those hours of forced practice. He'd mistaken obedience for passion. The waitress reached the nocturne's final cadence. Her left hand lingered on the keys a second longer than written, letting the last chord breathe. A liberty no teacher would allow. The millionaire found himself holding his breath until she lifted her fingers. When she stood, he saw how her left hand flexed subtly. Whether from pain or remembrance, he couldn't tell. She didn't bow or acknowledge the gathering applause. Just touched the piano lid once before walking back toward the kitchen. That's when he moved. Not for his wallet this time, but the business card case in his breast pocket. The one he usually reserved for venture capitalists and golf club members. The cardstock was heavy, cream-colored, embossed, not printed. He reached her just as she pushed through the kitchen doors. "Call me," he said, pressing the card into her hand. They both felt the tremor in his fingers. Then he turned before she could reply. Back at his table, the $100 bill still lay where he'd left it. He folded it absently and slipped it into the waiter's tip jar instead. His daughter would be waiting at home, likely dreading tomorrow's lesson. He suddenly knew exactly what they'd do instead. The waitress reached the nocturne's cascading arpeggio section. Her left hand tensed before striking the first note. The old fracture ached where cold weather always found it. She remembered how her teacher had drilled this passage, metronome clicking, pencil tapping her wrist when she rushed. Back then, she could stretch the octave without effort. Now her pinky finger barely reached the 7th. The waitress did something her conservatory self would have called cheating. She broke the chord, rolling it slightly instead of playing all notes together, adjusted the fingering to avoid her damaged joint. The modification should have made the music stumble. Instead, it gave the phrase a yearning quality Chopin might have appreciated. A man at the front table nodded almost imperceptibly. His calloused fingertips rested against his water glass. The waitress didn't see him mouth, "clever," to himself. The millionaire's elbows hit the table. The silverware jumped. His untouched dessert fork teetered near the edge, then stilled. He'd heard this nocturne performed flawlessly at Carnegie Hall last season. This imperfect version held his attention harder. Near the kitchen doors, the sous chef fumbled his phone from his pocket. The screen lit up as he opened the camera app. The waitress didn't notice the red recording light. She was watching her own left hand navigate the keyboard like unfamiliar terrain. Pain radiated from her wrist with each chord change. Instead of resisting it, she leaned into the sensation. The discomfort became part of the music's texture. Her shoulders dropped slightly, not the pristine posture of a concert pianist, but the loose surrender of someone playing alone in an empty room. The restaurant's overhead lights seemed to brighten as she played. Dust motes swirled in the sudden illumination. A woman at table 9 breathed through her mouth without realizing it. At the bar, a man stopped swirling his whiskey. The ice had melted completely, but he didn't call for another. His glass left a wet ring on the polished wood when he set it down. The waitress added slight rubato where her old teachers would have demanded strict time. The nocturne became less, a faithful reproduction and more a conversation, with Chopin, with her younger self, with the damaged nerve endings in her wrist. A junior waiter carrying a tray of dirty dishes froze near the service station. His arms shook slightly from the weight. Normally, someone would have hissed at him to keep moving. No one did. The millionaire's cufflink caught a glint of light as he touched his temple. His daughter always stiffened at this point in the piece, fingers locking in anticipation of difficulty. The waitress did the opposite. Her economy of motion made every movement count twice. The sous chef's phone captured her profile in the flickering candlelight, how her eyebrows drew together just before a tricky passage, how the left hand sometimes hovered a moment too long, as if negotiating with pain. Her right hand took over, a phrase normally shared between both hands. The adjustment should have left the music unbalanced. Instead, it created space where none existed before, like turning a cramped room by rearranging the furniture. A busboy's tray clattered as he set it down too hard. No one turned to look. The usual restaurant sounds, clinking glasses, scraping, chairs, had become distant things happening at the edges of perception. The waitress played through a particularly harsh stab of discomfort. Her tempo wavered for half a measure, then steadied. The dissonance actually deepened the piece's melancholy before resolution. At the chef's table, the pastry sous stopped mid-bite. Her fork hovered halfway to her open mouth. The chocolate ganache dripped onto her wrist without registering. The piano's sticky D-flat key resisted slightly when struck. The waitress worked around it instinctively, substituting the D natural when the melody allowed. An old upright in her childhood home had the same quirk. The memory surfaced sharply, her father humming along off-key in the next room. For 3 minutes and 17 seconds, social hierarchies dissolved. Bar regulars sat as rapt as the wealthy patrons. Kitchen staff peered through the service window. The restaurant owner forgot to check his watch. The hostess, who normally monitored table turnover like a prison guard, let a reservation party wait by the door without interrupting. Her usual strained smile relaxed into something real. A wine. Steward paused mid-pour. The Cabernet sloshed slightly in its glass, staining the linen. The customer didn't complain. The nocturne's final bars approached. The waitress simplified the left hand's pattern, sacrificing complexity for emotional weight. The changes didn't diminish the music. They made it hers in a way perfect execution never could. As the last notes faded, the piano's dampers settled against the strings. The waitress kept her hands in place a moment longer than necessary, feeling the vibration through her fingertips. The restaurant remained absolutely still. Even the hum of the refrigerator in the bar quieted, as if pausing in respect. Someone's watch alarm beeped faintly and was quickly silenced. At table 4, a man's napkin slipped to the floor. He didn't retrieve it. His dinner companion touched the back of his hand. Neither spoke. The millionaire's jaw worked silently. His phone buzzed against the tablecloth again. This time he picked it up. Not to check the message, but to power it off completely. The waitress finally lifted her hands. The piano bench creaked as she shifted her weight. Her left fingers curled gently into her palm, the ache now secondary to something else, a sensation she hadn't felt since before the accident. The busboy finally remembered his tray. He hefted it toward the kitchen with exaggerated care, as if loud noise might shatter what lingered in the air. Over near the bar, the sous chef stopped recording. His thumb hesitated over the send button before forwarding the video to the restaurant's group chat. It would reach Twitter within the hour. The piano's fallboard clicked shut under the waitress's fingers. The sound startled several diners from their reverie. Then the millionaire stood. His chair legs scraped loudly against the hardwood. Every eye in the room followed him as he crossed toward the piano. Not clapping yet, not speaking, just moving with quiet purpose. The waitress didn't see him approaching. She was looking at her own left hand, flexing the fingers slowly, testing their limits now that music had reminded them what they could still do. When the millionaire spoke behind her, his voice carried only enough for them both to hear. "That wasn't what I expected to hear," he said, then corrected himself. "It was better." The sous chef's phone lay dark on the service counter. For once, no one was looking at screens. The waitress touched her wrist absently, tracing the surgical scar. Beneath her sleeve, a busboy dropped a glass in the kitchen. The sound shattered the lingering spell. The restaurant exhaled all at once, silverware clinking, chairs scraping, 100 private conversations resuming. But something had shifted in the room's chemistry. The bartender poured drinks with less flourish. Diners spoke in lower tones. The hostess seated the waiting couple without her usual competitive table assignment. As the waitress walked back toward the kitchen, no one asked her to play another song. No one offered more money. The moment had been complete, exactly as it was, imperfect, transient, and utterly irreproducible. The millionaire returned to his table, leaving something small and rectangular on the piano's lid. His daughter watched him with an expression he hadn't seen since she was very small, something between wonder and dawning hope. In the kitchen, the waitress tied her apron again over her stained uniform. The business card in her pocket crinkled faintly when she moved. Around her, the dinner service continued as if nothing had happened, but something had. For 3 minutes, she hadn't been the woman who served food or wiped tables, just someone who remembered how to speak in a forgotten language. The piano's lingering vibrations still traveled through the restaurant's walls, faint but undeniable. A waiter bumped into her near the expo station. "Sorry," he muttered automatically, then looked up. Really looked. "I didn't know you could." The waitress took the steaming plate he'd almost dropped. "Table 4's risotto," she said. The corner of her mouth turned up. Not quite a smile, but close. Then she pushed through the swinging doors, back into the noise and heat and ordinary chaos. The piano sat silent again in the corner. The candelabra's reflection wavered in its polished lid. On top, untouched, lay the millionaire's business card. The waitress would find it later when she came to wipe down the tables at closing. But for now, the moment had passed. The nocturne was memory. The restaurant's rhythm resumed. And life, changed in subtle ways no one could yet name, went stubbornly. The key, final note hung in the air longer than physics should allow. The piano's dampers settled against the strings with a whisper. No one moved. The waitress kept her fingers on the keys a moment after the music ended. Her shoulders rose and fell with each slow breath. A strand of hair stuck to her temple. She didn't brush it away. The restaurant's usual noises, chinking glasses, scraping chairs, remained absent. Even the kitchen's constant clatter had silenced. Only the hum of the refrigerator behind the bar persisted, unaware it should stop. His table. The millionaire's fingers tightened around his wine glass. The stem threatened to snap. He set it down carefully, leaving fingerprints on the bowl. His chair legs shrieked against the hardwood as he stood. Every eye followed him across the room. His polished shoes made soft clicks against the floorboards. The waitress still hadn't looked up from the keys. Her left hand flexed subtly in her lap. He stopped beside the piano. The waitress smelled his cologne, something expensive with citrus and wood notes. Her shoulders tensed instinctively, expecting another bill. Instead, leather creaked as he opened his wallet. Not the money compartment, the card slot. His fingers hesitated before selecting one. The business card landed silently on the piano's music desk. Thick stock, cream colored with dark blue lettering. A single name, a phone number, and 3 words: Elite Music Productions. "Call me," he said. His voice caught on the second word. Then he turned before she could respond, walking past the staring diners toward the exit. The hostess opened her mouth to say something as he passed her podium. Closed it again. His daughter hurried after him, forgetting her purse under the table. The waitress finally looked at the card. The embossed letters reflected the candlelight. Her thumb found the slight indentation where his name was pressed into the paper. A crash came from the kitchen, someone dropping a pan. The sound broke the spell. The restaurant erupted. Applause came first, scattered, then unanimous. Someone whistled through their fingers. Glasses clinked together in toasts the waitress couldn't hear. Her ears still rang with the piano's echo. At table 4, a woman wiped her eyes with her napkin. Her companion reached across to squeeze her hand. Neither had touched their expensive steaks, now congealing in cooling fat. The bartender poured 2 whiskeys unasked and brought them toward the piano. Changed his mind halfway, setting them on the nearest empty table instead. The waitress stood up carefully. Her knees shook slightly. The piano bench scraped as she pushed it back. When she turned, a wall of faces stared back, some smiling, others just looking, really looking at her for the first time. She touched the piano's lid once before walking away. The wood hummed faintly under her fingertips. The card stayed where he'd left it, anchored by its own weight. Through the swinging kitchen doors, the noise swelled to meet her. Cooks banged ladles against pots. The pastry chef blew a party favor left over from someone's birthday dinner. Everyone talked at once. "Did you know she could? That was the same girl who... Why is she working here if she can..." The words blurred together. The waitress kept walking, past the line cooks, past the dishwasher who gave her 2 thumbs up. Her locker door squeaked when she opened it. Inside, next to her spare apron and ibuprofen, hung a yellowed concert program from 6 years ago. Her name printed in small letters near the bottom of the roster. She touched the paper without taking it down, then shut the locker again. Back. In the dining room, the sous chef uploaded his video. The caption read simply, "You never know." His thumb hovered before hitting post. Then the restaurant's Wi-Fi symbol spun as the file uploaded. At the piano, the millionaire's daughter snuck back in alone. She traced her fingers over the business card, then flipped it over. On the back, in her father's precise handwriting, "For lessons, if you're willing." The waitress splashed water on her face in the staff restroom. The soap dispenser hissed when she pressed it. Suds foamed between her fingers, smelling faintly of lemon. Through the door, the crowd's noise continued, not the usual dinner murmur, but something brighter. She dried her hands slowly. The paper towels rasped against her skin. One finger caught on a hangnail, tearing it slightly. A bead of blood welled up. She pressed the towel against it until the bleeding stopped. Her apron pocket crinkled when she moved, the $100 bill still tucked inside. She'd forgotten about it entirely during the performance. Back on the floor, customers waved her over to compliment her. She nodded politely, checking tables for empty water glasses more out of habit than necessity. Everyone wanted to talk about the music. No one mentioned the way her left hand occasionally curled against her thigh when she thought no one was looking. The business card remained on the piano. The bartender polished the surface around it carefully, avoiding direct contact. It became its own kind of decoration, more meaningful than the candelabra. At closing time, the waitress wiped down tables as usual. Crumbs clung to her damp cloth. Someone had left an unusually large tip, not the millionaire, just a couple who'd been sitting near the kitchen all evening. The bill had "Bravo" written on the receipt. When she reached the piano, the card was still there. The restaurant owner hovered nearby, pretending to check inventory. She picked it up carefully, sliding it into her pocket alongside the cash. Her coworker appeared with a mop. "You gonna call him?" he asked, nodding toward her pocket. The waitress looked at the piano keys one last time before closing the lid. In the kitchen, someone had already started the dishwasher cycle. The machine whined through its first rinse. "I don't know," she said, and realized she meant it. Outside, the millionaire sat in his parked car across the street. His daughter peppered him with questions from the back seat. He didn't answer most of them. The waitress emerged through the staff entrance at 11:37. She paused under the streetlight to check her phone, face illuminated in the blue glow. He could see the moment she pulled the card from her pocket and turned it over in her hands. His daughter stopped mid-sentence when he started the engine. "Wait, aren't we?" "We're going home," he said, and turned the car away from the curb before the waitress could notice them watching. The kitchen staff walked out together 10 minutes later, laughing about something the line cook had said. The restaurant's neon sign flickered off. Deep inside the building, the piano sat silent again, its strings still retaining traces of warmth from hands that had remembered themselves. A bus passed between the millionaire's car and the restaurant just as the waitress reached the crosswalk. When it rumbled past, she was gone, vanished into the city's late-night foot traffic with a card in one pocket, and the echo of music still moving through damaged nerves in her left hand. The traffic light changed 3 more times before the millionaire finally pulled away. His phone buzzed twice in the cup holder. Somewhere behind them, back at the restaurant, the sous chef's video passed 500 retweets. But for now, there was just the quiet hum of the car's heater, the daughter asleep in the back seat with her head against the window, and a question that would go unanswered until morning, whether the waitress would always keep her hands folded in her lap when asked to play, or if tonight had changed something fundamental. At her tiny apartment 40 minutes later, the waitress set the business card on her dresser. It sat next to a framed photo of her college graduation and a tube of pain cream for arthritis. The radiator hissed nearby. Her phone buzzed, a manager's group text about next week's schedule. She opened the notification, then hesitated. The keyboard's cursor blinked, waiting for input. Outside, a siren wailed 3 streets over. Her neighbor's television played a laugh track through the thin walls. The business card caught the dim light from her bedside lamp, the embossed letters casting tiny shadows across its surface. The waitress set her phone down without replying. She flexed her left hand absently, rubbing the scar with her thumb. Then, turned off the light, leaving the card to glow faintly in the moonlight that slipped between her curtains. Somewhere across the city, the millionaire stood at his daughter's bedroom door. She slept curled around a stuffed bear he'd bought her years ago, before piano lessons and expectations and unspoken disappointments. Downstairs in the living room, their grand piano sat silent. The sheet music on its stand was. The sous chef's video hit 100,000 views before his alarm went off. Notifications lit up his phone, shares from music teachers, retweets from conservatories. By lunchtime, 3 talent scouts had called the restaurant asking how to reach her. Her old classmates found the clip before she did. Comments stacked. Up under the video, "We wondered where you went. That passage at 217, you used to crush it. Still simplifying the left hand, I see." The restaurant owner intercepted her as she clocked in. He held a clipboard with next month's schedule. Saturday nights now said pianist where waitstaff used to be. The pay rate was double. The first direct message came from the millionaire's daughter. A blurry selfie showed a girl with braces biting her lip. "Can you teach me? Dad says you're allowed to say no." The text timestamp read 6:03 a.m. Her former instructor's email arrived at noon. 3 paragraphs about technique and resilience. The last line read, "You play differently now. Better." The attachment was a PDF of sheet music with fingering adjustments for damaged hands. She kept the apron, hung it on a hook next to the upright piano the millionaire had delivered to her apartment. The stain near the pocket had set permanently. Occasionally she'd touch it between scales, remembering how heavy trays used to dig into her shoulder. Notes still escaped her. The Chopin Etude's final arpeggio tripped her up just like before. The scar on her left wrist ached in humid weather. But now when she played through the pain, she didn't curse the limitation, just worked around it like a familiar detour. The Millionaire became her first official patron. No contracts, just a standing transfer every first of the month. Enough for rent, not enough to feel owned. His daughter's lessons happened on Sundays at the girl's request. They spent as much time talking about stage fright as they did practicing scales. Back at the restaurant, management replaced the decrepit baby grand with a restored Steinway. The waitstaff buffed its lid twice a day, though no one complained when the busboy snuck in to plink out heart and soul after closing. Teaching revealed gaps in her own knowledge. She ordered pedagogy books and marked them up in the margins. Sometimes she'd catch herself mimicking her old teacher's phrases, listen to the space between the notes, and wonder when his wisdom had taken root. The sous chef kept uploading clips of her weekend performances. Views plateaued around 300,000. A few hate comments accused her of faking the waitress gig for clout. She never responded, but the restaurant hostess did, with a photo of the original $100 bill framed behind the bar. Her hands grew calluses again, just in different places. The right pinky developed a harder edge from demonstrating techniques for students. The left thumb's pad softened without tray-carrying duties. The Millionaire attended her first proper recital. She spotted him in the third row, daughter beside him, both wearing matching expressions of forced nonchalance. His hands clenched during her risky interpretation of a Bach invention. Only relaxed when the audience did. She kept her old waitressing, shoes by the door. The rubber soles were worn thin from kitchen floors. Some mornings she'd slip them on just to remember the weight of a full shift. At the restaurant, new hires asked about the framed business card hanging near the espresso machine. Regulars told the story over martinis, each version slightly embellished. The manager let the myths grow. Better for tips, better for bookings. Her childhood piano teacher came to a Thursday night set, sat near the back where she wouldn't have to make conversation. She played his favorite sonata midway through, modifying the cadenza to suit her hands. Afterward, he left without signing the guest book, but the water glass bore his lipstick smudge. The Millionaire's daughter outgrew her braces but not her lessons. Her playing grew looser, less precise, more joyful. Her father stopped timing. Her practice sessions. The metronome gathered dust in their living room. Rainy evenings found the former waitress, back at the restaurant piano. Not working, just playing. The dishwashers timed their breaks to listen. No one requested happy birthday anymore. A music therapy program contacted her about adaptive techniques. She demonstrated chord substitutions for arthritic hands, showed how to roll octaves when stretching hurt. The attendees took notes like she'd once done in master classes. Her left wrist would never heal completely. Cold mornings still brought stiffness. But now, when she massaged the scar tissue, it felt more like a roadmap than a prison sentence. The sous chef finally got around to deleting the original viral video. No one noticed. By then, a dozen cell phone recordings had taken its place. The restaurant's Instagram featured live clips every Friday. She kept the first apology note from the Millionaire in her sheet music folder. His handwriting was surprisingly messy for a man who wore cufflinks. "You were right about the nocturne," it read. "I heard it again last night. You made me listen wrong." Her scale routine changed to accommodate the damaged tendons. Fewer arpeggios, more attention to phrasing. Sometimes her students would mirror the adjustments without being told, their own hands instinctively finding easier paths. The restaurant owner offered to take her name off the schedule entirely. She declined. Every other Tuesday, she still worked, hostess shifts. Liked remembering how the reservation book's spine cracked when opened too wide. At a jazz brunch, she spotted two busboys from the old days. They'd brought dates, ordered mimosas. When she improvised over "all the things you are," one of them choked up. His girlfriend handed him a napkin without asking why. The Millionaire's daughter graduated to harder pieces. Struggled with the bar, same passage her teacher still secretly avoided. They worked through it together at half tempo, dissecting each troublesome transition. Neither mentioned the elephant in the room, That pain makes certain choices for you. Her old apron frayed at the edges where it rubbed against the piano bench. She considered retiring it, then stitched up the worst tears with dental floss. The manager gifted her a new one embroidered with House Pianist. She wore it once, then went back to the original. Former co-workers came to her sets when they could. The bartender always made her the same mocktail, ginger beer with lime. The sous chef took over posting clips when the hostess got busy. Views didn't matter as much now. Late one night, cleaning smudges off the Steinway, she found a child's sticky fingerprint on middle C, likely from the millionaire's daughter during an impromptu lesson. She left the mark there, just wiped around it. New servers asked why she still helped bus tables between sets. The veterans knew better than to wonder. Some habits outlive their necessity. Some gestures become ritual. The accident's anniversary passed without her notice. That evening, she played the Chopin Nocturne again. Same arrangement as that first night. Same imperfect stretches. This time, when her left hand hesitated, no one held their breath. They just waited with her until the music moved on. The quiet woman who serves your coffee might know 5 languages. The man stocking shelves after midnight could solve complex equations in his head. Talents hide behind tired eyes and worn hands everywhere. That waitress could have kept scraping plates. The millionaire might never have asked. Most stories like this end before they begin, not with a bang, but with dishes left unplayed. Your eye. Barista's fingers know more than the espresso machine. The security guard hums perfect pitch in the break room. The world drowns these whispers with routines and assumptions. Keep your ears open. Keep your eyes ready. And if you recognize that, whisper in yourself, play,